All right, we are just about ready to begin. In the talk previous to this talk, in the astrology talks, we did a review of what we are trying to do in these talks. We have been mostly speaking about change in consciousness astrologically in time. And we've been talking about a funneling down, where we start with very large sectors of time and work right down, and hopefully we get to the day and maybe even the hour of an event. And that's what we've been trying to do. However, these talks, it was mentioned, were not linear. That we would follow a theme toward that general end, and then we would jump in order to bring something else in. It's sort of like in music, a composer will introduce a theme and do something with it and develop it, and then he'll need to bring something else in. That's usually done, like if it's a four-part piece of music, in the second section, something else will be brought in. And in that meeting last time, we took a jump and we began looking at a new subject with epicycles and such on it. And what we did is we tried to introduce a totally different kind of astrology. It is a cosmological or a cosmogonical astrology, and that is the astrology of the creation of our solar scheme, which is much more than the solar system, and how it functions. Now, cosmogonical astrology has one thing in common with the standard astrology that we have mostly been studying. And the thing in common is the qualities with planetary names. Not the planets, but the qualities that have planetary names. Like robust qualities we call martial qualities. They are associated with the planet Mars, but they're also associated with the name Mars. Now, in standard astrology, as we're calling it now, there are actually planets. Now, at this point, I have to apologize. I would like to be standing at the blackboard doing this, but I had a severe wrist injury a little over a year ago, and I'm still recovering from that yet, and I cannot move the furniture around in such a way that I can get at the blackboard. So you'll just have to visualize in your mind, which might be a very good exercise for you. But we have the list of planets. We have Sun, and then the first planet out is Mercury, and then we have Venus, and then we have the Moon, which is part of the Moon-Earth system. And we have then Mars, and then Jupiter, and then Saturn, and then Uranus, and Neptune, and Pluto. I don't have enough experience yet with the trans-Pluto planets. I'm interested, but I haven't had the time to work with them yet. Now, there's a different list of names that are associated with cosmogonical astrology. It begins with Saturn, then the Moon, then the Sun, then the Moon, then Mars, then Mercury, then Jupiter, and it ends with Venus. Now, both use the same names, but remember, we're associating with qualities and not names. One uses these names and qualities with the heavenly bodies, with the planets in standard astrology. But in the astrology that we are looking at, which is sometimes called revolutionary astrology or cosmogonical astrology, those names are associated with the qualities that describe segments of time in the Great Creation. Now, both are used at this time in our evolution, but the cosmogonical astrology has existed since way before the solar system, and it will continue to be functional way after the solar system. The solar system as we know it now is only one small segment of the entire creation. Now, both of them, if we're talking about a period of time now, we can say that cosmogonically it is, say, for example, a Mars time. At the same time, there might be some very strong aspects to Saturn in standard astrology. So the mood of the moment is contributed to by two sources. And this is similar to, these are things that you have to take into account when you're working with even regular natal judicial astrology. An aspect that may be one thing in the life in an older person will mean something very different to somebody who is 8 or 9 years old. So, okay. So, we looked at those 7 planets, Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus. And in the last talk, we looked at them in various orders. And the most common order is called the ladder of the stars. Last time we called it the Ptolemaic order, and we called it the Chaldean order, but it's also called the ladder of the stars because it relates to the planets relative to Earth. The planet that moves the fastest is the Moon, so that is the beginning of the sequence. The planet that moves next fastest is Mercury, and then Venus, and then the Sun, and then Mars, and then Jupiter and Saturn. That is called the ladder of the stars. However, we usually start it with the Sun because the Sun is the center of everything. So the sequence that you'll hear over again and again in these talks is Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, as it wraps around itself. All right, we're just about caught up to where we were. We looked at that sequence, the ladder of the stars sequence. We looked at that relative to divisions of time in ways that we can use them. We related it to the Sun-Earth in that we talked about Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. And then we said that within each day, the hour that rules, the planet that rules the first hour after sunrise is the ruler of that day. And then it follows, like on Sunday, it's the first hour Sun, and then the next hour Venus, Mercury, Moon, and it wraps all the way around so that by the time you got the 24 hours done, the first hour on the next day is a moon hour, so that is a Monday. And we talked about some applications of that, and we said that that order works from everything from planetary hours all the way up to the 7 days of creation of the cosmos, which are not the same as the 7 days of creation in the book of Genesis. That is telescope, but we'll maybe get to that at another time. All right. The next few minutes of this talk are going to sound more like the mysticism talks, because we're talking about, in the mysticism talks, we're talking about the creation and the order of the creation. And we're looking at our solar cosmos, and our solar cosmos is again much more than the solar system. Now, as mentioned earlier in the previous talks, and we'll re-mention it now, and it'll come up again several times this evening, in the Great Creation, there are 7 periods of time. There are also 7 globular formations, which are not the planets, and there are 7 revolutions of consciousness through the 7 globular formations. Now, these periods, globes, and revolutions have the same names in the same sequence: Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus. We're going to run into that again and again. And we're talking about the flavor of creative activity in relation to time. Now, it's no accident that this is not an accident, and this is not a sentimental gesture, that the days of the week are Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Not at all. It is, we saw last time that this carries all the way from the birth of the cosmos right down to the hours of the day. So we're talking about a system, a spiral system that is active on many different levels. And the principle of analogy is what holds everything together. It is the unity of the one carried throughout all of the diversity. Now, as just stated, what we're talking about and what we're going to recapitulate this evening is only a very skeletal presentation of the divine creative plan. The reality is much more complicated, but it's based on this same septenary principle played off against itself. Again, this is very much like music. A composer will introduce a theme, and after the theme has been introduced, there will be variations on the theme. And then there'll be variations on the variations and variations within the variations. And thus, out of a very simple theme played off against itself in various ways, you get a beautiful symphonic work that has a coherence and it has a musical logic to it. And that's analogous to what the whole creation is like. Now, it's most easy to get a gist of this by looking at your week. Monday has a certain flavor to it. In some ways, it's sort of a letdown, an emotional letdown, because on the weekend we've had life easily. On Tuesday we have to get down to work, and even our work week, each day has a quality to it. And what we're talking about is a quality that's much more dominant in a much larger scale. So, stated simply, there are within the revolutions of consciousness, 7 revolutions through 7 globular or globular formations in 7 periods of time. Each of those revolutions of consciousness is a spiral. And each spiral has epicycles, spirals on spirals. And there are spirals on spirals on spirals to an almost unbelievable level. But they are all analogous. And since there are cycles on cycles on cycles on cycles, you get many combinations. And in those combinations, there are extremes of variation. And that is purposeful in several ways. One of the most important ways is that there is an economy to a creation. Mind you, the universal spirit is holding this whole creation over eons and eons in its consciousness. And if any of you have ever tried working with concentration or meditation, especially concentration, to hold something in mind when you first begin for a few seconds is a hard task. So to think of holding a creation in consciousness over many eons through all the 7 periods is an enormous act of will, creative will. And you want to be economical about that. If you're going to do it, you want to get as much done as you can in that period of time. And so the way it works is you have variety. A whole variety of things is happening within these spirals upon spirals upon spirals. And we see this economy where no bit of space is wasted. If you look at any microenvironment in nature, it has its own life and it has its own little atmosphere. And that is in space and in the matter that fills space. That is an example of economy of space. Nothing is wasted. There's always something that is done. So that's one of the reasons for the variation. So you can get as many different things done within the same period of creation. Another reason for all of the variations is repetition. Remember, we're taking beings from deep unconsciousness, and by the time the whole period is over, the beings that started in deep unconsciousness are going to awaken to consciousness of divine creativity, with the ability to create for other becoming beings the same things that one has just gone through. Now, even in the education of our children, it's a matter that repetition is necessary because it takes a while for things to sink in. And if you think about bringing something in a mineral stage of consciousness to a state where it can learn to grow like a plant, that's quite a task. And that requires many, many repetitions to bring this about. Now, a lot of people who are mystically inclined don't want to hear this because we're thinkers and we're proud of our thinking, especially if we've had creative thoughts. And we don't like repetition because it's boring. And it's only boring because of the vanity and egoism that we have about ourselves and what we deserve in life. If we're really putting our spiritual being into what we're doing, repeating something, not a vain repetition, but repeating something with subtle nuance again and again is a very, very wonderful thing. All right. Now there are other reasons for repetition and variation, but we're not having a class on cosmogony. We're only talking about it relative to periods of time, so that's enough to give some examples. Now we want to talk about something else. We humans, even if we just consider ourselves, our physical bodies, are the product, we're the living history of this creation. Everything we are is a result of what has happened in the creation as it has worked on us. Now, everything in our being then is a consequence of our evolutionary history. We are, I hate to use the word artifacts, but we are facts and artifacts of everything we've gone through. So let's look into that cosmic history in such a way that we can get to where we want to get there. We're going to get to some astrology, but it's going to take us a while to get there. The very first manifest period in our solar cosmos was called the Saturn period. It took place deep in the spiritual worlds. The highest realm was the realm of divine spirit, which is the will to be, and the lowest realm was the concrete subdivision of the world of thought. So the whole creation and we as beings in that creation were no more concrete than thought. That's interesting, very important. And in that Saturn period, we were passing through a mineral-like state of being. In that mineral-like stage of being, we learn to take form, any form. Rather than just being completely amorphous, we had to take a shape. Something as simple as taking the shape of a sphere, which is about as simple a shape as you can find. And that's what our work was to take shape. I would assume that it's analogous to the minerals in our kingdom, in our time, because the minerals in our time provide stability and shape. If the minerals didn't hold solidly, our bodies would puddle away. So our lesson then was form, to take and hold and sustain form. Now, the mineral-like state and the Saturn period, that continues the rulership of that. Saturn rules the current minerals. If you're looking at a horoscope and you want to understand how this person relates to the mineral kingdom, such as ingesting minerals for the body or things like that, you look to Saturn. All right, the second period was called the Sun period. Now, the Sun period, we had to recapitulate everything we did before. So, in the revolutions, they follow the same pattern as the periods. So, in the first revolution of the Sun period is called the Saturn revolution. And it is all about form, the physical form. So when we come into Sun period, in the Saturn revolution, the first revolution, those primal shapes that we had to be changed. They had to change in order to accommodate something like vitality. Vitality so that there could be life and growth and change of form. So that's what took place in the Saturn revolution of the Sun period. In the Sun revolution of the Sun period, the work of the Sun period began, and we learned to develop a vehicle of vitality. And it is very much like we were plant-like. We were going through a plant-like stage. And our work then was analogous to what the plants are now. Now, when we look back at the Saturn period, that ability to sustain shape and the resistance that allows that to take place, for a shape to endure, that awakened for us relative to us as becoming beings, that awakened the power of will. Our plant-like existence, where we could have growing forms that could change and have a material or a concrete vitality, that reflected to the life spirit, which is the divine imagination that can imagine anything. So from the experience of producing various forms, changing forms in various different types of forms, that reflected to the life spirit. And in a manner analogous to the fact that our plants grow in the medium of minerals, whether it is water or soil or whatever, the life spirit grows within the aegis of the divine spirit. So at the end of the Sun period, we have a twofold spirit and a twofold body. So that's the beginning of that is the work of the Sun period. But the whole of this creation is sinking deeper and deeper into concretion. In the Saturn period, the greatest density was in concrete thought. And all of the activity took place between divine spirit and concrete thought. The activity in the Sun period took place between life spirit, one step deeper into concretion, and the desire world. So we can see that everything is creeping down toward the stage where we are at now. All right. The third period is called the Moon period. And let's look at the revolutions again. In the Saturn revolution of the Moon period, we had to again work on the physical body. And we had to anticipate the work of the Moon period, which was to produce motivation, to produce desire, to produce feeling. In the Sun revolution of the Moon period, there was a recapitulation of our etheric nature in order for it to accommodate desire, emotion, feeling, motivation. And finally, when we get to the Moon revolution of the Moon period, we have the work of the Moon period, which is the building of a vehicle of desire, of feeling, of emotion, but most of all, motivation. Because in the Moon period, we were going through a animal-like state of existence. And this means that interlock between plant and soil, or between the plant-like stage and the mineral-like stage, that is broken because animals can move around. And in order to move around, they have to have motivation. And they have to have a reason to move around. There has to be, and desire or motivation requires an objective. And so that was the work of the moon period. Now, with detached bodies, we began to experience an independence, a somewhat succinct being. And in the same way that the mineral-like condition reflected into the will and the vital experience reflected into life spirit, the independence of the animal-like condition, this being that could stand on its own in form, that was not necessarily connected to the other realms, that reflected into a self. At this time in the moon period, we had a threefold spirit. We were a spiritual entity. The least number of lines that can define an independent form in space in any number of dimensions is 3 lines. And in the same way that creates a triangle. Don't worry about the shape of the triangle, but the triangle is the simplest object, geometrical object in space that can be produced by lines. And the triangle is the symbol of the threefold spirit, which is an independent entity. Now, this self was was an independent being, but it wasn't manifest yet. Now we have seen all along that the bodies, like the physical body relating to the chemical state, and the vital body relating to the etheric state, and the emotional body relating to the animal-like state, that reflected into a threefold spirit. Now the goal of this all is consciousness. Like the consciousness of plants is better than the consciousness of minerals. People who can read the consciousness of different beings say that the consciousness of a mineral is basically non-existent, whereas with a plant it's like a deep sleep or something like that. Whereas animal consciousness is like an inner picture consciousness that reflects the outer world and brings meaning to the perceptions. Now, the goal is to become conscious, and that is our work right now in the 4th or the Earth period. Now, the Earth period marks the end of our involution. You know, in the moon period, things sunk deeper or went deeper into concretion, so that in the moon period, the cosmos was as dense as the ethers, which science would say was as dense as energy. And though the science wouldn't understand things about the desire world and the higher worlds, they do understand that there are entities and states of being that are energy only. So the first half of the Earth period is an involution of the whole cosmos deeper into matter. It goes so deep as to be the stuff of this physical world. this chemical world that we're living in. The second half is dematerializing. It is returning back into more spirituality, less concretion. So, at the very depth of the fourth revolution, of the fourth globe, of the fourth period is what we're living in now, and it is as dense as it's going to be. In fact, we're actually past the depth of materiality, and things are going to become rarer as time goes on. All right, so the active worlds in this period are from the world of concrete thought down to the chemicals. Those are the active manifestation. Now we have work to do. And we are coming to our self-consciousness instead of being led willy-nilly through mineral-like, plant-like, and animal-like states. When we become self-conscious, then it's sort of like a child. When it becomes mature, then it can do its work in the world. Children are served, and they don't really come into the work in the world until they're capable of it. And so our work is to conquer the material world, not necessarily as it's done by mining and things like that. That's a small part of it. And to take the stuff of the material world and form it into something that can become part of the consciousness of the universal spirit. That is to say, it takes the unknown, which is what matter really is, and brings it into something being known. And so to do this, we had to become self-conscious, creative beings, and we had to, as spiritual entities, that threefold spirit, we had to enter into our bodies. And in our bodies, we could carry out our work. This necessitated another change in our bodies. So in the first revolution of the Earth period, our physical bodies were changed in order to accommodate a mind. In the second revolution, the etheric body was similarly modified in order to accommodate a mind, so that thought could be brought down through the energies into the physical body, into the physical brain. And in the third or moon revolution, our desire bodies had to be modified or retooled, you might say, in order to accommodate thought. And finally, in the fourth revolution, we developed a concrete mind. Very important, the central feature. And once the mind was developed, the self could enter into its vehicles and become self-conscious. And we become self-conscious by self-consciously thinking. Because when we think, we know we're thinking, and we know that we are. We know that is the truth. So, right now, it is for us to become wakingly self-conscious. Some people have not done that. There are very few people, but there are people that are not self-conscious. All right. At this time, we are self-conscious. And the most important cycle to us at this time is the cycle of rebirth, where we have experience here in the physical world, and then our physical bodies die, and we take all of that experience and process it and bring it back into the spirit. The spirit is inspired by the new information it has, and it starts to cycle all over again. Now, most people think that the times in the heaven worlds are in between life are the most important times. They're not. They're for processing the material. But you have to have something to process before you can process it. And that can only be gained here in incarnation in the physical world. So, that, it is, I can't stress the importance of that too much. Now, the talking about the life cycle and what we do in it, I recommend you look to the mysticism talks, because in the mysticism talks that has been covered, and it has been recovered from several different points of view. All right, now we can see that our personalities, which is everything from the divine spirit, the will to be, all the way down to our physical bodies, are completed, and we're doing our work of alchemizing the minerals. Now, our total personalities are not only histories of everything that has happened in the evolutionary creation, they are also, I don't know how to say it, they're microcosms. What has happened at large in the worlds has happened in small in our developing being. And in us, all of the same creative patterns that we have been following with the Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, all of those things are built into our being, into all of our bodies, and we work with that. All right, that's what we're going to talk about now. I told you we're going to get to the astrology of this, and it is an extremely useful astrology, especially for parents and for teachers. So we're going to have a brief discussion of the bodies, and we're going to talk about one feature of our bodies that is not spoken of much in physiology, and that is climacterices. Climacterices. Now, climacterices are changes that happen in our bodies every 7 years, approximately every 7 years. And they're based on a philosophy that every atom in our body changes every 7 years. I have questions about that philosophy. In fact, I even have doubts. And I wonder whether it's an average or whether there is something I don't understand. Now, physiologists claim, and they have researched this very carefully, that the skeleton regenerates every 10 years. The liver, on the other hand, regenerates every 60 days. Now, those are cellular regenerations. The claim that is made about the 7 years is atomic. And so I don't know if there's some kind of atomic interchange that takes place or what, but I just have a lot of questions. Nonetheless, the climacterices do exist, and they are recognized by modern physiology. And they are triggered by hormones. They are, but again, not everything is precise. The climacterices average around 7 years, and they are triggered by the pituitary gland, because the pituitary gland is the captain of the endocrine system. Now, the pituitary gland is ruled by Uranus, and we all know that Uranus can be somewhat erratic in nature. I have never seen a study of it, but I suspect that the aspects of Uranus in the horoscope have something to do with whether the climacterices come early or late. For example, if someone has the Sun conjoined Uranus, Mars likes to precipitate things quickly, and that might indicate early climacterices, whereas Saturn conjoined Uranus might slow it down or have them come late. The pituitary gland, or it's called the pituitary body properly, is the only endocrine gland that is triggered by the nervous system. It's the only endocrine gland that has a connection to the nervous system. And the nervous system, we know, is astrologically ruled by Mercury. So in extreme cases, thought can change the occurrence of the climacterices. In fact, I think years ago I used to go with a friend and visit people at Central Colony, which is where the unfortunately mental retards are. And all of them that I ever saw and visited with, even advanced ages, are childlike. And so we can see that their bodies have not undergone the rigors of aging. They seem, it's a surprising thing. Doesn't mean that they don't get old and die, but they maintain a youthful quality to them, and I think that has something to do with Mercury and its influence on the pituitary body. All right. Modern physiology and medicine only work with two climacterices, which they call the great climacterices. Those two are puberty and menopause, which in males is called angiopause. When you start losing all that testosterone and old men become old women. All right. There are physiological changes in each climacterix, but the ones at the great climacterices are the most obvious. For example, at around age 7, permanent teeth come in, and rapid growth begins. And obviously, puberty and everything that goes along with it begins around age 14 with the entrance into the third climacterix. Now, the changes are initiated by the etheric vital body, but they are physical changes. Now, to mystics, physical changes have their origins in inner things. Character is eventually manifest physically because the physical body and the outer world are the proving grounds of our creativity. They are the finalizations of our creativity. If we can bring it all the way here to where the greatest limitations are, we have really done something. Now, changes unique to the individual occur usually with unique times in unique events. However, general changes like climateric changes are pretty much the same for everyone because everyone has gone through the same evolutionary creation, the Saturn period, the Sun period, the Moon period, and now the Earth. And, so we are all very similar in terms of evolutionary history. However, the evolution of our bodies is phased off. Our dense physical body is the oldest. It's been there from the very beginning. And it has developed to its finality in 4 periods. So the physical body is ripe. The vital body began in the 2nd period, and it won't reach its ripeness, which comes after 4 stages, until the next period, the Jupiter period. And the desire body began in the 3rd period, and it will not be ripe until 2 periods ahead of us. That is the Venus period. And the concrete mind, which is just now in its infancy, its very first stage, it won't come to ripeness until the very end of the creative manifestation. Now, it's one of the features of this creative scheme that things come ripe according to the pattern. That is the 4 stages. There are examples of things that come ripe after physical manifestation. And the best example that I can think of is kittens. Kittens are born, meaning they're ready to be in the physical world. They've done everything that they can inside the mother of the cat mother, but they're born blind. And it takes a few weeks after birth before they ripen to sight. I think about 3 weeks, I think it is, as I remember. I grew up on a farm, and it was something we marveled at as children, to see kittens born blind and then gain their sight later. Now, the same thing is manifest in human birth into the physical world, into the chemicals. Now, because the vital body and the other vehicles are in their earlier stages of development, they're not completely ripe at birth, even though the physical body is. So they require more time for them to become ripe. This is the way it works according to mysticism, which is based on observation. The first 7 years of life are like the Saturn period. They are for the physical body, and for the mineral, the recapitulation of the mineral state. The organism does grow and it does experience feelings, but in those first 7 years, the feelings and such are not its own. They belong to the mother. In fact, the very early stages right after birth, all of the control of the child is through the mother. So they get, we have what we call the universal child. There's something about all children, little children from infancy to 7, that is the same. It's universal. There's that same universal innocence because they haven't developed that character. I see it. I live right across from a school, and I can see the different stages in the children. And there is no racial difference between the children. They're universal children. But when they reach a certain age, then all of the differences come in, cultural differences, physiological differences. Now, all of the children are adorable, whether it's animals, little animals, or whether it's human, because they have that innocence that everybody loves. We all want to be innocent. We all want to be pure in that same way. So during this recapitulation of the Saturn period, the physical body is the all to the child. If a child has an owie, it has a pain. If it's discomforted in some ways, that's its whole being. It doesn't worry about whether it's going to affect its thoughts because it doesn't have any thoughts. It is thoroughly invested in the physical body. So that you might say that almost the physical body is almost entirely a sense organ, the same way it was when we were in the Saturn period. Now, the climacterices don't come precisely at 7-year intervals. Some come early, some come late. And we could look into that, and I've given some hints about that, by looking at Saturn. The reason we can say this, we don't even have to do a lot of heavy astrology. Saturn goes through one sign or 30 degrees of the heavens every 7 years. And just seeing what the background of, I meant Uranus. Every 7 years, Uranus goes through one sign of the zodiac. So by looking at the background of Uranus, you can get some idea of what is transpiring. The progressed moon, which rules all biological development, goes through 1/4 of the zodiac, so that by 28, when we reach majority, the moon has progressed all around the zodiac, and it has completed the cycle. We'll talk about that a little bit more ahead. It's an interesting thing. I don't want to talk about it much now, but Saturn goes through approximately 1/4 of the zodiac, and the destiny that needs to be built into the incoming organism is controlled by Saturn. So the things that we have ripe from past lives in that way. So we can say that this whole thing is astrologically, we can relate to it. There are other cycles, but I don't want to talk about them too much here. Now, the second 7 years are a recapitulation of the Sun period. In the Sun period, we went through plant-like stage of evolution, and we developed the vital body. This meant that we are capable of vitality and growth. We just covered that just a few minutes ago. And if we look at the second 7 years of life, they're called the period of dangerous growth, because the body shoots up like a little tree. It grows very rapidly. Also, in that second 7 years of life, it is the period of tireless energy. You almost can't tire a child out in that period. And in the same way we identified with our physical body in the first 7 years, in the second 7 years, we identify with growth and vitality. I don't know, it's probably, if it's the same for all of you, but there was always the door frame, and you would stand at the door frame and somebody would put something across your head, and then you'd put a mark on the door frame, and then a few months later you'd do it again, and then there would be marks on the door frame, and you knew you were growing up, and you cheered for yourself to grow up, because that was your life in that second septenary. some things are not done right about the septenaries. Some parents tell their children, if you don't eat your vegetables, you're not going to grow up. That is a real threat to a child at that age that is identifying with growth. Some people even consider it cruelty to children. Now, again, we said the changes don't come precisely, because in each of the climacterices toward the end of the 7-year period, there is already an anticipation. Now, not all of the rapid growth begins exactly with the cutting of permanent teeth. It's been anticipated. It's been building up. And so what we're talking about here is a gradual process. It's not, not something that happens real quick. We're working toward self-consciousness. And it is through our experiences with those that come before us that we're working our way toward self-consciousness. Now, when we're talking about these different periods, education is can be triggered to this. Now, Rudolf Steiner developed what is now called Waldorf education. He did not include the astrology in it, nor have any of his followers that I know of. So what we're doing here is we're going to do it for the anthroposophists. But the whole system of education is based on observation of children by teachers and parents and what they see coming ripe, not just the obvious things like the cutting of teeth, but there is a whole science of watching children, and when you notice certain things, that means they're ready for something else. And so the whole of Waldorf education, even the way they teach art, in very early ages, children make little curves of color, and then they learn to weave them as they become more developed. And as they become more developed, yet it becomes extremely complicated. Those are just simple examples of what they do. We're going to come back to this in just a little bit. Now, the climacterics at age 14 is one of the major climacterices. It is called puberty. It is when humans become capable of reproduction. And it is when we are most interested in reproduction, because the desire nature and everything that goes along with the desire nature is born at that time, or in that climacterics. And one of the chief desires is to replenish the species. And so the desire for sex is part of it. Now, the 7 years following age 14 are a recapitulation of the moon period. And in the moon period, we went through an animal-like stage of development, and we developed our desire bodies. Hence, the mind has not yet been born, and the spirit is not yet fully self-conscious. It's sort of a pseudo-self is born with the desire body, which is another topic that we don't want to go into tonight. This is going to be pretty long as it is. But the emotional nature is born, and if you look at teenagers over 14, they're all beautifully romantic. I can remember my high school years. I was a true romantic, but I couldn't say anything to anyone. That's one of those things that's hard. In the moon period, we developed the self, and we, in the Lemurian epoch of this recent fourth revolution of the Earth period, that was a recapitulation of the moon-like state. And in the Lemurian epoch is when we rebelled. And so when we get in this third climacterics, between 14 and 21, we relive the rebellion. And it's important because that is how we separate. The same way that animals are separated from the earth, where plants and minerals are not, we have to separate in our personality. And that begins with rebellion. Very important thing. I have great concerns. I've known a few people in life that never rebelled, or when they did rebel, it was too late, and it was really something tragic. All right, we're getting there now. All right, I always figured this is only going to take an hour, and I'm always proven wrong to myself. The climacterics at age 21 is called majority. In the United States, it's when we are allowed to vote because we are considered reasonable enough to be able to make sound decisions. Now, some people have, in this climacterics is when the concrete mind is born. Now, some people reject and say, well, if we can send people to war before age 18, why can't we send them, why can't we allow them to vote? Now, I don't know that this is being too finesseful, but there is a difference between being able to act on desire in a warlike manner and the ability to make a rational decision in order to vote. So the majority is somewhat in harmony with nature. This brings us, so the birth of the mind. I can remember after 21, every month was a new philosophy. I was very inclined toward philosophy, and I loved to argue philosophy. This is more academic philosophy, but it seemed that the mind kept being born more and more. And at age 24, when about the time I had the mystical experience, I became extremely philosophical. All right. Now we have to talk about something more important. We're at the fifth climacterics. And all of the things that are recapitulations of things that we have done before and are in a stage of development have been reborn. The first 7 years, the physical body was supreme. The next 7 years, the vital body was supreme. And the next 7 years, the emotional desire body was supreme, and then the mind. And then we come to 28. And this is the fifth septenary. Now one would expect that this is the septenary of the self, the spirit. And that is true. But it isn't going to just happen. The first septenary just happened because we had done that work already. And this was just an unfolding or a carrying on of something that had been done already. But, so it didn't take any effort to waken up the desire. And it's not the same thing with the later septenaries. From age 28 on, they aren't just going to happen. So the fifth septenary is for the human the self, the human spirit. Now we think we're self-conscious in the self, but we are not. The self is a spiritual being. It's a transcendental spiritual being. That means the self is universal. Now, can we say that we are voluntarily self-conscious of ourselves as divine, universal spiritual beings? Most people would say you're crazy if you think that. Now, some people do have momentary experiences of the self. They're called baptisms of the Holy Spirit. And some people have momentary self-consciousness deep in meditation. But ask yourself, can you say that you are a universal spiritual being and know it from experience? I can't. I've had moments, and those moments are life-changing, but I can't say that in my waking consciousness or voluntarily that I can wake up in that. It's something that we aspire to. The period between 35 and 42 is for the life spirit. And that is even more far-fetched than waking up in the human spirit. We can work on altruism and life spirit qualities. We can culture friendship. But to wake up in a realm of truth and love and beauty that is even beyond abstract reasoning, that's so universal that it's pure truth, that's really more far-fetched. However, because in our fallen state, we have need to pick us up. Occasionally, on rare occasions, people do have experience in life spirit, an experience of Christ consciousness. It is a special grace that is need to save people. Saul on the road to Tarsus had experience in human spirit, but also knew face to face the life spirit. And his life was changed, and he's changed all of history. And he was not a saint when that happened. So I have, I cannot say much about the age between 42 and 35 and 42. Between 42 and 49 is the time for the divine spirit, and I'm not going to be follyful and presumptuous to state anything. I do not have any speculation of what that consciousness is to be awake in divine spirit. But on some lower octave of it, we do experience something. Now, when we reach 49, all of our vehicles had the potential of being awakened. All of us, or almost all of us, have awakened the physical, the etheric, the desire, and the mind. Some can partially awaken or momentarily awaken in human spirit, and some are granted a grace of moments in life spirit, and I have never heard of anyone having an awakening in divine spirit, but the potential is there, and it'll carry into the future in our evolution. So all of our vehicles are completed. And that happens at the climacterics around 49. Bing! The bell rings off, because at age 49 is the other great climacterics. That is menopause or angiopause. The possibility of going any further with any of our vehicles is over. But life isn't over. We don't all die at age 49. So what happens then is we have to relate in a resonance to future states of consciousness. And what happens is our vehicles, all of our vehicles, all 7, are for the purpose of compounding soul material. And so this is what happens, is the potential for becoming soulful begins after the great climacterics. And it follows the same order, except that it has a different meaning. In the beginning of the first, it was ruled by Saturn for the physical body. When it comes to the after the first 7 years after the great climacterics, it is for Saturn and the divine spirit. It is when we compound conscious soul out of the chemical subdivision of the physical world. The body hasn't completely broken down, but in breaking down and in being less capable, in fact, the body begins breaking down at age 28 already. They won't teach you to be a pilot in the services at age 28, because by then your reflexes are going away. But at any rate, I don't want to get too far off with all of this. So what happens is the first 7 years between 42 and 49 and 56 is the compounding of conscious soul. The next 7 years are for the compounding of intellectual soul, and the next 7 years are for the compounding of emotional soul. And it begins with the same sequence: Saturn, Sun, Moon. Now, what happens after the age 70, when 10 septenaries have been completed? I have no answer for that. I have none whatsoever. But it is pretty well understood that astrological effects wear off. At some ages, you're very vulnerable to what's happening astrologically in the air and in your horoscope. But after age 70, the effects wear off. And I can vouch for that. My body is 86 years old now, and I can say that a lot of the astrological effects are not dramatic in my life. The most extreme ones are, like falling and breaking a wrist or having cancer. The most extreme influences are there, but not all the minor ones, or not all the ones that you used to be sensitive to. Now this finally brings us to the astrology of all of this. And it's going to be very simple, but it is extremely valuable if you are a parent of a young child, or if you are a teacher. This is an interrelationship between the cosmogonical astrology, which we're calling revolutionary astrology, and standard astrology of the planets in the heaven. They tie together in a way that is very simple, but extremely useful. It involves the primary and secondary qualities of any given year. And the years are given in ordinal numbers and not cardinal numbers. Like the first year is from 0 to 1, and the second year is from 2 until 3. 1 until 2, I'm sorry. So it's in ordinal numbers. So the primary qualities of any year are ruled by the ruler of the septenary. The secondary qualities are ruled by the ruler of the revolution. That is, all right, let's take an example. The first year in life occurs in the first 7 years, so it's ruled by Saturn. But the first revolution of the Saturn period is ruled by Saturn. So the first year in life is Saturn, Saturn. So if you look in the horoscope of the child and look at Saturn, the disposition of Saturn will tell you things that are important to the development of that child. The second year, the primary rulership is still Saturn, but the secondary rulership is the Sun. Then by looking at the compound disposition of Saturn and Sun, you can learn things that are very important. This carries on until age 7. The age from between 7 and 8, the primary ruler is the Sun. And the secondary ruler is Saturn, because always the first revolution is Saturn. So there are echoes between what happened in the second year and what happens in the 7th year. And so on, all the way through to age 21, each year has a primary and a secondary ruler. I think that this is important for education and for childcare. And I think you don't need to know a whole lot of astrology. Just a few simple things about astrology and these few things about the primary and secondary rulers. This brings a whole lot of things to light. I've developed this, but I've never had an opportunity to do much with it because I wasn't a parent, and very rarely am I called on to have something to do with little children. I think this is most important with little children, probably up until age 14. Yeah, so at one time, this is not part of Waldorf education, but at one time I had a conference with an astrosopher, which is what anthroposophists call astrologers. They don't want to be called astrologers, so they call themselves astrosophers. The man had written several books, and I have those books. And I shared an afternoon with him, and I shared this material to him. And he was excited about it. And he thought this was something really wonderful. But I don't think he ever did anything with it. And even though he had a lot of people that he consulted, I find that anthroposophists are sometimes a little bit parochial and unwilling to make big changes, and this would have been a big change for him. But at any rate, I have done very little with this. I would do it if you happen to have little children, and I can find the time, or if there is, I can deal with you directly, I would be happy to do this. So, this is something very simple. All you need to do is know the primary and secondary ruler of each year. You can even make a table for yourself, and then you can look at horoscopes as those times come, and you can see something that may be helpful to see why this person is not the standard human being. If a person is a very strong solar person, they're going to, that second septenary, and every second revolution in any septenary are going to be important, and they're going to shine. And if you understand the solar character of that individual from the horoscope, you can be very helpful. All right. This is as far as we're going to go with this, and now we'll probably be going back to the funnel method and try to tie all of this together. I hope that you have been willing to sit through all of this, because it's important to see how everything we are is a product of a spiritual evolution, and that spiritual evolution has the qualities that have planetary names, and those qualities reside in all of us, and the development, the best development that we can get from those qualities is, we want to get the most out of life. In the same way that nature has all of this variability in order to get the most out of a creation, we have the opportunity with this kind of knowledge to get the most out of a given rebirth. Thank you very much. I really love doing this. I enjoy it. I hope it's helpful, because I put a lot of work into trying to do things to make life understandable and more practically usable for everyone. Thank you.